Summer League has come to an end, at least for the Sacramento Kings. There's still a few more games to be played, the championship to be played on Monday, but with the Kings not being involved in that, it is time to recap what went on in Summer League. The Kings had a 2-3 record, and then at the California Classic had some record that I don't remember because they had two teams and were switching around the teams all the time. It doesn't really matter. Record only matters really if they were going to make the Summer League playoffs, because then it's fun. But at the end of the day, the team performance doesn't matter too much. It's all about what we see from individual players. And that's because most of these players will never see NBA minutes, or at least meaningful NBA minutes. And so there are really only a few guys that we should be really looking at to see if they can contribute to the Kings, or if they will be able to contribute at some point. There were two regular roster players for the Kings playing in Summer League with Keon Ellis and Colby Jones. Of course, the three two-way players in Mason Jones, Isaiah Crawford, and Isaac Jones. And then you had Boogie Ellis, who signed an Exhibit 10 deal. And then you have the rest of just guys that are trying to perform well, either to get onto the G League team or make, another team's roster, or get a two-way contract from another team, or to go play overseas. But of course, the guys that actually have contracts with the Kings are the guys that we're going to be focusing on. And so we'll go through each one of them individually, talk about what we saw from them, what could, translate into an NBA level skill, and talk about it, if I think they could actually make an impact at some point on the NBA level. Before we get into that, though, I do want to mention just really quickly, I do have memberships now on this channel, which just means for a couple dollars a month, you can become a member on this channel. I don't have the most perks right now. That will probably be coming in the future, but you get shouted out in each video, priority reply to comments. Really, at this point, not too many benefits, so it's just really if you want to support me. But there will be like membership badges coming in the future and things like that. So just thought I would mention that. So let's start out talking about each individual player, and I think the obvious place to start is with Keon Ellis, because Keon Ellis, of course, a guy who started for the Kings at the end of last season, who has made a major impact at the NBA level, and a guy who many people were wondering, why is he even here? Kind of is he too good for Summer League talks? And I don't think that really made sense for him, considering he was on a two-way contract as soon as last season. Like, he played a lot of last season on a two-way contract. We have to remember this. He has a small sample size in the NBA. It made sense for him to still come into Summer League. This is his third Summer League with the Kings now. Because even a guy like Keegan Murray, who played an entire season as a starter, he even came back into Summer League and played in the California Classic last year. And that's the fourth overall pick. Keon Ellis, an undrafted guy who was on a two-way contract, like I said, as early as last season, it makes sense that he's still going to be on the Summer League team. So I think they wanted to put him in an uncomfortable position, see if he could expand his horizons as a player, do things that he normally wouldn't be doing on an NBA floor, given more responsibility, and see what type of ceiling, I guess, he has as a player. And he played well in the California Classic, struggled a bit at the start of Vegas Summer League. The first two games were pretty quiet from him, and then he had a big third game, and they sat him down after that for the last two games. When you just look at all the guys on this Summer League roster, he's the guy that matters the most. This Summer League was all about him, and that's because Devin Carter wasn't playing, unfortunately, our first round pick. And so, like I said before, most of these guys are not going to play NBA minutes, and we know Keon Ellis will play regular NBA minutes next season, and so this Summer League really revolved around him. And although he had some, off games, I do think he showed that he was a level above everyone else on this roster. Because at the end of the day, on the NBA level, he is a role player, a catch and shoot 3-and-D player for the most part. And so it makes sense that he might not dominate every game in Summer League, because he's not someone who's going to make a lot happen off the dribble. But he did show that he could take over games. He showed that he could knock down threes. He showed that he could attack closeouts and was comfortable shooting in the mid-range. I think what we saw is when defenses really pressure him and he has the responsibility of being like the primary playmaker of the team, it can get a little sketchy, but I'm not too worried about that because that's just not going to be his role in the NBA. And of course, you don't want a guy that's going to make bad decisions, turn the ball over when they're pressured a lot. But I think he showed enough that he could make the simple plays, that he's a little bit more than just a catch and shoot 3D guy. He can make the simple plays in the pick and roll. He can get to his spots in the mid range. I would have liked a little bit more if he attacked the rim a little bit more. We saw it a little bit, not a lot. His shot continues to look great and he looks very confident in it. And then we know what he can do on the defensive end, and that's really what we need from him. I think when you slot him into the Kings as the fifth option offensively, I think he's pretty perfect for that role. I think a couple of my worries that I have with him are defending bigger players on the other team. Sometimes the size can get him and they can just go through him, go over him, and then also that can lead to a bit of foul trouble. He gambles a lot, so that can lead to foul trouble. That's one thing I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on for next season. And I think defending size is just going to be one of the weaknesses of this Kings team overall. And so he doesn't really help with that. And he's going to be kind of one of the problems just because he's going to be asked to guard up sometimes because the Kings just don't have that wing depth. And so I could see that being a bit of a problem, but that's really not his fault. That's more just on the Kings roster construction as a whole. So I think what we saw from Keon Ellis this summer league was positive. I think it was just him continuing to build upon what we saw last season. He proved that he was above this level. And so I'm excited to see what we'll get from him next season. I think it'll be a little more up and down than what we saw last season, just because it's going to be a bigger sample size. He's going to be playing more. But I think overall it was a pretty positive showing. Now moving on to Colby Jones, who also is a regular roster player for the Kings. He did not have as smooth of a ride in Summer League. This is his second Summer League. He's going to be a second-year player. And Summer League it's a time of overreactions. And normally I'm on the side of the positive overreactions, the optimistic side of things. And if a rookie struggles in Summer League, I don't think that's a big deal. But Colby Jones, he's a second-year player. He's an older second-year player. And there were times that he looked a little lost out there. When he was drafted, he was compared to a guy like Josh Hart. And you can understand the comparison. A rebounding guard who's going to just hustle, make the smart plays, isn't the best shooter, isn't the biggest guy. And so I think it just takes a lot to live up to that type of comparison, because really what you're saying is this guy has to beat the odds to become an NBA player. He is not a primary playmaker, doesn't have the best handle, can't shoot the ball that well, doesn't have the most size, isn't the quickest, isn't the most athletic, but they have to have that it factor kind of just making positive plays and being a smart player. And I think we saw that last Summer League. I think we saw it in the G League, but I didn't see it as much in this Summer League. That's not to say he wasn't rebounding the ball. He was getting deflections and getting steals and playing solid defense. But I think when you look at where his shot is at, where he doesn't have that consistent three-point shot, his free throw percentage is not good. He doesn't have a tight handle and he isn't explosive. I feel like the little things need to pop, and they really didn't this Summer League. He had the one big scoring game where he was scoring off the dribble. He was, hitting shots off the dribble, hitting step backs in the mid-range. And so, those are positive signs, but that's not what he's going to be doing in the NBA. And he had one game of that. We saw a couple more off the dribble shots, but to me, that just didn't really seem sustainable. I liked it more when in the last game of Summer League, he was scoring off of a steal on the fast break. He was scoring because he faked a handoff and then exploded to the rim and hit a reverse layup. He was scoring because he was cutting to the rim and getting a pass and laying it up at the rim with a nice finish. He has to score in those ways to make an impact at the next level. And it feels like we didn't really see that until the last game of Summer League, because he didn't look comfortable under pressure on the ball. His finishing wasn't as good as what you would want. because he's a guy that can't create a lot of separation, and so he has to be really good finishing through contact, and I don't think he was great at that. He loves to get to that right-handed like floater push shot, getting to the middle of the floor, but even that didn't go down super consistently. And so I would say it was a little bit of a worrying summer league from him, because up to this point I'd always thought like he is going to be an NBA player just because of how smart he is in the hustle plays. And again, you don't want to overreact too much to summer league because it is a small sample size. But it really doesn't seem like he's there yet. Maybe he has improved his shot a little bit and his shot off the dribble, but I don't think that's at an NBA level yet. And I just think he's going to need more time in the G League, which is disappointing. I just think coming into this summer league, I was really high on him, and his performance here just dampened my expectations of him. Let's move on to the two-way players, and we'll start with the oldest, Mason Jones. It's either his birthday today as of recording this, or it was yesterday. I can't remember. But he's 26 years old, so he's older for summer league and for being a two-way player. And I feel like what Mason Jones did this summer league is proved that he can be a guy that's relied upon in an emergency situation. You know, I don't think he's a guy that's ever going to be a regular NBA rotation guy, but I think he does a lot of things well that's going to allow him to either continue to be on this two-way contract or to be, you know, one of the last guys on a roster, be a depth guy on an NBA roster somewhere. If you watched any summer league game, you heard about how he lost 45 or 50 pounds or whatever it was. I feel like the number kind of changed a bit every time the story was told, but he lost a bunch of weight, and you could tell. He looked explosive, he looked strong, he looked extremely confident, which is what you would want in a 25, 26-year-old now playing in summer league. He looked comfortable shooting off the dribble. He looked solid playmaking out of the pick and roll. You know, it wasn't always the best. He didn't look like an elite playmaker out of the pick and roll by any means, but solid. Finished very strong. He had multiple and ones throughout this summer league. He can shoot from a lot of places on the floor. He can shoot from very deep. He can guard strong players. And I think when he gets downhill with the ball, good things usually happened. I think that when he ran into trouble was when he was getting pressured outside the three-point line. I think that's kind of when we saw some of the turnovers. But when he got downhill, when he was able to set up the pick and roll like he wanted to, that's when good things happened. We saw him pushing the break a lot, but then he would pull it out if it wasn't there. And that was something I liked. He didn't force things. He pulled it out. He would set up the offense. He looked calm most of the time, except for that one game against the Grizzlies, which the Grizzlies Summer League team was very good, but they forced a million turnovers. But I think Mason Jones is a guy that could get promoted to the NBA roster. We have 2 roster spots left, so I think he has a shot. I don't think he really has a shot of getting any meaningful minutes unless there are injuries, but I do think he could get promoted to the roster. Then we have our 2 new two-way guys. So we'll start with Isaiah Crawford. Now, Crawford played most of Summer League off the bench until Keon stopped playing, and then Crawford started the last 2 games. And so we didn't see a lot from him offensively. It felt like he wasn't super involved most of the time, but when he did get involved, when he would catch the ball, he would either knock down a 3, he shot a great percentage on smaller volume, but every one of them just looked perfect pretty much. And then he looked super comfortable with the ball in his hands, attacking closeouts. He looked comfortable getting to the mid-range or getting to the floater. He didn't want to go all the way to the rim. He didn't want to finish at the rim, but he has that floater. He has the mid-range. He looked comfortable bringing up the ball in transition. He's got a solid frame, good lateral quickness, was able to stay in front of guys, has active hands, got deflections. And so I like that despite him having pretty low usage, not touching the ball a lot, when he did touch the ball, he was pretty mistake-free. And I think for him, as someone who projects to be a 3-and-D guy, that's important because you're not going to be touching the ball a lot if you're playing alongside Fox and DeRozan and Monk. But when you do touch the ball, you got to be able to hit the 3, or you got to be able to attack the closeout and make the right decisions, or you got to be able to push the ball up in transition. And so he's definitely an intriguing player because he does have size, I believe listed at 6'5". He's got a good wingspan. And he is by far the youngest out of any of our two-way guys, even though he's not that young. He's 22 years old. Mason Jones, like I said, 26 now. And Isaac Jones, I believe, is 25, if I have that right. But I think that 3-and-D wing is something that the Kings need. And so he has the opportunity. There aren't a lot of guys in front of him right now on this roster. So he has opportunity. The last two-way player, Isaac Jones, is someone that I'm rooting for just because I've liked watching him. He's 6'9", he's got a massive wingspan, he's got good vertical ability, he's got that standing vert, and he's pretty versatile defensively. He can guard out on the perimeter, has pretty solid lateral quickness for a guy of his size. We saw him with some pretty big blocks, and I was really curious how the three-point shot was going to look for him because he didn't shoot a lot in college, especially not his senior year. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. When he caught the ball and he was open, the stroke looked solid. He also looked solid from the free throw line, which is a good sign. Now, when he was asked to put the ball on the floor, when he was getting contested, then he should not be shooting those. Those looked bad. But when he's open, open corner three, he can knock them down. He also showed the ability to pass, showed some ability to make things happen and attack the rim off the dribble. And I think he could excel with like a better playmaker around him as a screener and a roller and getting to the dunker spot. He's someone that I'll root for, but it just doesn't seem likely that he'll be a rotational player in the NBA. I mean, he's older at this point. It seemed like at times he wasn't moving super quickly out there defensively, not because I think he's slow, but because I just don't think he had the instincts of being in the right spot. I feel like he has the physical ability there, but he just wasn't quite executing it defensively. The Kings went to him on the post, especially the last two games of Summer League, and it was mixed results. But at the end of the day, like, we're not going to be seeing the Kings put him out there and then go to him in the post. Like, that's just not going to happen. So not really concerned about what happened there. But yeah, I just think it's unlikely because of his age, his limited shot, his lack of size, even though he's got the wingspan and the athleticism, still 6'9", as a guy that probably is best at the 5 just because of his shot. And, I think sure, he'd be great as a 4 next to a 5 that can space the floor, but that's not what he's coming into for the Kings. And so, yeah, I just think it's unlikely that he'll get much run. Although the Kings are shallow at the backup center, and I think the Kings will go out and sign a backup center, but we'll see. And then we have Boogie Ellis, who was on an Exhibit 10 contract, and he was one of the bigger bright spots for me. He's about 6'1", but he's got a 6'7" wingspan, and he's just a tenacious defender. He's a dog. He was getting into guys. He's going to press up full court. He's going to force turnovers. He forced an 8-second violation by himself. He showed that ability to slide his feet on the defensive end. And then on the offensive end, he's not afraid to shoot the 3-ball, but he can also score at all 3 levels. He was showing the fadeaway in the mid-range. He showed the ability to finish high off the glass. And so that's good for a smaller player, knowing how to finish around the rim despite the size. And so when I look at him, I compare him to Davion Mitchell, right? Just because of the size. Boogie, bigger and a bigger wingspan, but still they play similar roles. And I also look at a guy like Jose Alvarado, that kind of archetype of player where he's just going to be a pest defensively, and then he can shoot from 3. Davion couldn't really shoot from 3, and so that's why he didn't succeed. But he also couldn't really finish around the rim either. And I feel like Boogie showed the ability to do both and defend, make sure he's not going to be like quite as crazy of a defender as Davion moving his feet like that, but he still looked very quick and like a very good defender. And so he has the size playing against him, but man, he just looked so good in Summer League, and he was my favorite player to watch. He was just fun. And like I said, he just brought that like tenaciousness and the dog mentality. And I loved that. He's on an Exhibit 10. But man, I would love if he could get one of those two-way contracts. We have them all filled out. But like I said, we also have 2 roster spots. And I could see a guy like Mason Jones getting promoted just to fill those spots if we don't find other guys, because Mason has shown that he's a solid depth player, I think. And so I just hope that Boogie finds his spot within the Kings organization, because he was just so fun to watch. So those are the main guys that we care about, of course, but just some other guys. Drew Timme started every game, and he was fun to watch. And I do think he could be an NBA player. I think Jerry Reynolds summed it up pretty well when he was talking about him, saying that he could be an NBA player just because he's smart. He's a solid passer, knows how to create those advantages around the rim to score. But, the athleticism, obviously not great. I don't think he's a player for the Kings, because that's just not what we need. We need that athleticism at that size. But he looked like a good player that he could play in the NBA. And he showed the ability to stretch the floor at times. And then some other standouts. Adonis Arms, for some reason, left the team for the last 2 games. I'm not really sure why, but he had that size and the ability to handle the ball and score. And he was scoring at all 3 levels, so he was interesting. I'm not really sure what happened with him, but he was an interesting player. And Xavier Sneed, an older player as well, but his athleticism just popped, and he has some size at the wing position. And I just thought he was in the right spots a lot of the times. I would say of the guys that have contracts with the Kings, the stock up guys are Keon Ellis, Mason Jones, Isaiah Crawford, Boogie Ellis, and Isaac Jones to some degree. And then the stock down is mainly Colby Jones. So I think most of the guys we cared about performed pretty well. And it was just Colby that was a bit disappointing. And of course we hope all these guys pan out, but in reality, most of them won't. That's just, how it works when you go after these undrafted guys or guys drafted in the second round like Colby. Most of these guys just aren't going to pan out in the NBA. We can hope, because I like a lot of these guys. And I think you see when one of the guys does pan out, like Keon Ellis, it can be a huge boost to the team, especially when injuries happen and you need that depth. So anyways, that is it for this episode of the Real Report. Now that Summer League is over, we get into the dark depths of the offseason. But of course, if any news around the Kings comes around, I will be right back here to talk about it. And, I might throw together some more content here and there. So be on the lookout for that. Peace.